The scent of roses still lingered in the apartment when Isabel walked through the door, arms full of gift boxes and a cake she had picked up from his favorite patisserie. The lights were dimmed, the curtains drawn. Romantic, just the way she had planned it. Today marked 3 years since she had married Marcus Lau. 3 years of building a life she believed in. 3 years of trying to be the kind of wife he could be proud of. She called his name, expecting him to be in the study, or maybe setting up her surprise before she could reach him. No answer. A faint sound echoed from the bedroom down the hall, muffled laughter, then a soft moan. At first she froze, the boxes still clutched to her chest. Her mind told her it couldn't be what she thought. Marcus was strict with boundaries. He hated drama. He despised rumors. The box slid from her hands and landed on the hardwood floor with a dull thud. She walked slowly, not because she was afraid, but because a part of her still hoped she would be wrong. But when she pushed open the bedroom door, she saw everything. Vivian Han, her best friend since university, lay tangled in the silk sheets she had ironed just that morning. Marcus stood at the edge of the bed, shirtless, reaching for his discarded pants without urgency or guilt. For a moment, no one spoke. It was too quiet, too intimate, too real. Isabel didn't scream. She didn't throw anything. She just stood there, frozen, staring at the man who had once promised to protect her heart. Vivian looked embarrassed for all of 3 seconds before flipping her hair over one shoulder and pulling the blanket higher. "You weren't supposed to be home yet." That was all she said. But Marcus looked directly at Isabel, completely unbothered. "Don't make this dramatic, Iz," he said, reaching for his watch. "You knew we weren't working. You just didn't want to admit it." She blinked, once, twice. Her voice wouldn't come. Marcus stepped forward, buttoning his shirt slowly. "You're a good person, but let's be honest, this was never about love. It was about image. And frankly, you never fit the world I'm trying to build." His words landed like glass against skin, cold, sharp, indifferent. "I gave you everything," she finally whispered. "No," he said, voice dry. "You gave me loyalty, and loyalty's only useful if it elevates both sides." Vivian laughed from behind him. The sound rang out like a bell in a funeral. Something inside Isabel cracked. Not from rage, not from betrayal, from clarity. She looked at the man who once held her hand during her mother's funeral. The man who said he believed in her when no one else did. The man who now stood in their shared bedroom, dismissing her like a forgotten name on a guest list. And she realized he had never loved her. He had loved what she did for him. Without a word, she turned around. Her fingers trembled as she picked up her bag from the hallway. The cake still sat on the floor, flattened, its white icing smeared across the box like tears. She didn't take her phone. She didn't take her clothes. She didn't even take her wedding ring. She took one thing, her pride. As the elevator doors closed behind her, Isabel didn't cry. She walked out of that building with the last pieces of her heart tucked away in silence. Because in that moment, she knew. This wasn't the end of her story. It was the start of her becoming someone Marcus could never touch again. Gold-trimmed drapes hung like royalty at every corner of the Ritz-Carlton's Grand Hall, where Singapore's elite gathered in tailored suits and shimmering dresses to celebrate the engagement of Marcus Lau and Vivian Han. Socialites smiled for cameras, danced to live jazz, and headlines were already buzzing. The power couple of the year. Isabel shouldn't have come. Everyone told her not to. Joanne begged her to ignore the invitation. But the moment she saw the names printed on the ivory card, Marcus and Vivian, join us in love, something inside her hardened. She wore black. Sleek, minimal, unforgiving. She stood alone near the back of the room, watching Marcus move through the crowd like a king. Vivian clung to his arm like a prize. Their laughter was just loud enough to reach her. Her name was being whispered across wine glasses. The ex-wife who dared to show her face, pity dressed in silk. And then it happened. Marcus spotted her. Their eyes met across the room. He smiled, that smug, calculated smile she remembered too well. the one he wore when he knew he was winning. He walked toward her slowly, Vivian in tow, as though she were a minor inconvenience to be dealt with publicly. The music dipped, the room buzzed, and in seconds they were standing before her. "Well," Marcus said, glass raised, "I suppose you came for closure?" Isabel kept her gaze steady. "No," she replied. "I came to see how low my standards once were." Vivian scoffed. "You still bitter, Izzy?" "No," Isabel said again, more calmly. "Actually, I'm happy." Marcus raised a brow. "Happy? I'm married." The lie came out so smoothly, even she believed it for a second. Marcus blinked, the smile cracked. "To who?" She scanned the room quickly, and her eyes landed on him. Ethan. He was standing quietly near the exit, in a crisp black suit, holding a tray, one of the estate's quietest helpers. He had brought her tea during her worst breakdown, listened without asking questions, disappeared without judgment. The only man who had seen her cry without trying to fix her. She walked toward him. "Ethan," she said softly, "come here a second." He looked confused but followed. She turned to the crowd behind her and wrapped her arm around his. "This is my husband." There was silence. Marcus stared, then let out a short laugh. "You married a servant?" Vivian's expression twisted. "That's tragic." Isabel didn't flinch. But Ethan, he looked at her for a long second, and then he nodded. "Isabel is my wife," he said gently, "and I'm proud to be hers." The murmurs rose instantly, cameras clicked, faces twisted in disbelief. Marcus tried to recover. "This is ridiculous. Is this what you've become? A liar with a pity husband?" But Ethan leaned closer and whispered, only to Isabel, "If you want me to keep pretending, I will." Isabel didn't answer. She just held his hand tighter. That night after the party, as they walked together under the city's warm night sky, Ethan spoke first. "I know it was a lie," he said, "but I don't mind." She looked up, surprised. "You defended yourself," he added. "You stood tall. That mattered more than truth." He paused. "And if you want," he said slowly, "we can make it official." She stopped walking. "You'd marry me? For real?" "If it gives you peace," Ethan said. "I'll be whoever you need." And for the first time in weeks, Isabel didn't feel like a woman abandoned. She felt like someone worth choosing again, even if the choice began as a lie. The marriage took place in a quiet registry office with no guests, no flowers, no photographer, just a government clerk, 2 signatures, and a thin silver band placed carefully on Isabel's finger by a man who never pretended to love her, but never pretended to hurt her either. They left the building without ceremony. Isabel expected awkwardness, or maybe regret, but Ethan simply walked beside her, his hand warm around hers, his silence never heavy. He moved into her apartment the next day. He brought nothing with him except a small duffel bag, a second pair of shoes, and a wristwatch that looked too expensive for someone who once served wine in other people's dining rooms. The first few days passed like a quiet rehearsal. Ethan made breakfast before she woke up. Soft-boiled eggs, buttered toast, black coffee the way she liked it. He washed the dishes without being asked. He folded the laundry neatly. When she came home late from her freelance consulting gigs, he had already lit the candles and placed dinner on the table. He never asked where she had been. He never demanded attention. It felt surreal, like playing house with a stranger who somehow knew when she needed space and when she needed someone to fill it. But slowly, the cracks began to show. One night, she passed his room and found the door slightly ajar. Ethan was sitting on the bed, a copy of The Economist open on his lap, his brows furrowed in focus. The pages were marked with red pen, not casually read but studied. That alone wouldn't have mattered, except she also saw the open laptop beside him, its screen filled with stock market graphs and an open chat in Mandarin. Another evening, during dinner, she jokingly mispronounced a word from a French recipe she was reading. He corrected her gently, then repeated it in flawless French. She blinked. "You speak French?" He shrugged, picked it up over the years. But he never explained when, or how, or why someone who once worked in a kitchen could quote French philosophers and market analysts in the same breath. Then came the nights he didn't come home. He always texted, working late at a part-time gig or quest. Got a last-minute errand, don't wait up. But no details, no photos, no names. Isabel tried to brush it off. After all, she was the one who pulled him into this marriage without warning. Maybe he had a life before this. Maybe he was just giving her space. Still, doubt started to form. Soft at first, like the sound of a dripping faucet in another room. One night, she followed him. She waited until he left, then trailed 2 cars behind in her small sedan, careful to keep her headlights low. He didn't go to a part-time job. He didn't enter a shop. He walked into the rooftop bar of one of the most exclusive hotels in Singapore. She waited outside, heart pounding. He didn't return for nearly 2 hours, and when he did, he was in a different suit. Not a waiter's apron, a tailored navy jacket, pressed slacks, a silk tie folded into his pocket. He looked like someone else. She rushed home before he could see her hands shaking as she unlocked the door. When he returned, he acted as if nothing had happened. He placed a small wrapped package on the table and said, "Thought you might like this." It was her favorite Belgian chocolate. He noticed her expression. "Is something wrong?" he asked gently. She stared at him for a long moment. "No," she said, "just tired." But as he turned away, she whispered to herself, "Who are you, Ethan?" Because one thing was becoming clear. He wasn't just her husband in name. He was someone far more complicated. And if the truth didn't surface soon, she might end up falling for a stranger she didn't even know how to trust. The first headline appeared 3 weeks after the wedding. Bitter ex-wife marries her butler in bizarre power move. The photo showed Isabel and Ethan leaving a restaurant, her hand in his head slightly bowed. The article made no effort to hide its tone, mocking, invasive, and cruel. Within days, gossip blogs spread like wildfire, twisting their story into tabloid drama. Marcus, of course, didn't stay quiet. He posted a carefully curated photo of himself and Vivian at a beachside resort with the caption, "Thankful for people who love you for who you really are, not what you can give them." The message was clear. The comments were worse. She downgraded hard. "I guess maids make great husbands now." Marcus won. Isabel's clearly lost it. Isabel stopped reading after the 3rd article. She turned off notifications, avoided Google, and refused to answer any calls from numbers she didn't recognize. But the whispers found her anyway. At the coffee shop, at the grocery store, even at a work meeting with a client who raised an eyebrow and said, "Interesting husband choice." It hurt. Not because the world didn't understand, but because part of her didn't either. She had dragged Ethan into this, but he never complained. He made her tea when her anxiety spiked. He handled errands with silent grace. He took the spotlight she never wanted and carried it without flinching. But the mystery around him only deepened. He never asked her to explain herself. He never asked for gratitude. And that night, on a particularly heavy Friday, when Isabel came home after seeing Marcus's face on a public screen at Orchard Mall, something in her broke. She threw her bag on the floor and slammed the bedroom door behind her. Ethan knocked gently. She didn't answer. He didn't knock again. Later, as the silence settled and shame curled around her, she walked into the living room to find him on the balcony. The city lights stretched behind him like stars fallen to earth. He was sipping tea, barefoot, expression unreadable. "I'm sorry," she said, voice soft. He looked at her, not surprised, not angry. "I shouldn't have dragged you into this," she added. He set down his cup. "You didn't drag me." She stepped closer. "You didn't ask for this marriage, Ethan. And now the world thinks you're..." He interrupted gently. "A servant?" She flinched, but he smiled faintly. "Let them think what they want," he said. "I'm not who you think I am, and that's okay." She swallowed. "Then who are you?" He hesitated, then turned his gaze back to the skyline. "Someone who doesn't like watching good people get destroyed." Her breath caught in her throat. "I don't need anything from you," he continued. "Not answers, not promises. I'll protect you, Isabel, even if you never love me." even if you walk away the moment this is over." His words sank deep, not performative, not romantic, just real. She didn't know what to say, so she said nothing. She simply stood beside him, watching the city in silence. And for the first time in weeks, she felt like the whispers couldn't reach her. Not because they stopped, but because someone else stood between her and the noise. Not a shield, not a savior, but a man who had no mask to wear, only truths she hadn't yet asked to see. It started with a flash, then another, and then a dozen voices screaming her name. "Isabel, look here! Is it true you married your housekeeper? Does he clean your floors or your reputation?" She shielded her face as camera flashes blinded her, the rain falling in heavy sheets around her, drenching her coat and hair. The paparazzi had found her outside a quiet gallery in Tanjong Pagar, waiting for her car after a friend's exhibit. At first, there were 2 photographers, then 5, then a swarm. She tried to push through them, but they circled like wolves. One grabbed her arm. Another shouted Marcus's name. One woman shoved a mic in her face and asked if she faked the marriage for attention. Then she ran. Down the street, into the rain, breath short and fast. Her heels slipped on the wet pavement. Horns blared. The crowd thinned, but she could still hear them behind her. Still see the lights flashing like lightning against her back. Just as she turned a corner, headlights caught her from the side. A black SUV screeched to a stop in front of her. The back door opened. "Miss Isabel," a voice said, firm, calm, professional. "Please get in." She hesitated only a second before ducking inside. The car peeled off as another black vehicle followed behind. A convoy. She sat back in the leather seat, chest heaving. Rainwater soaked into the upholstery. No one spoke. The driver kept his eyes forward. They pulled into a gated estate 20 minutes later, nestled high above the city where the streets curved like private secrets. Security stood at the entrance, nodding silently as the convoy passed. The car stopped in front of a modern stone mansion with tall glass walls and garden fountains. She stepped out slowly, still catching her breath, as the rain turned to mist. And there he was, Ethan, standing beneath the arch of the entrance, wearing a perfectly tailored black suit, hair slicked back, no trace of the quiet man who used to make tea in her kitchen. His eyes met hers, not with guilt or panic, but with something steadier, as if he'd been waiting for this moment. She didn't speak. She just stared. He stepped forward. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way." "Where are we?" she asked, voice low. "My family estate," he said. "The press was becoming too dangerous. I didn't want you hurt." Behind him, a set of glass doors opened. Inside, a group of people waited, men and women in expensive suits, holding tablets, whispering to assistants. An older man in a navy tie nodded at Ethan as if acknowledging a superior. "Who are they?" Isabel asked. "My team," he said simply. "I'm the acting president of Huang Group." She blinked. "What?" "My real name is Ethan Huang," he said, "and I wasn't a servant." Her chest rose sharply. The rain wasn't cold anymore. It was her own breath catching in her throat. "You lied," she said. "I hid," he corrected. "When I met you, I was trying to escape that world. My grandfather wanted me to take over too soon. I needed time, I needed distance. But then you pulled me into your life, and I couldn't walk away." She stepped back. "So this was what? An experiment? A game to feel normal?" "No," he said quietly but firmly. "It was never a game to me." She wanted to scream, to throw the truth back at him. But all she could do was stare at the man who had once scrubbed her dishes, who had kissed her forehead without asking for anything in return, and realized that she had never truly seen him. He stepped closer. "I know you didn't ask for this. I know you feel betrayed, but everything I did to protect you." Her voice cracked. "You married me under a lie." "No," he said again. "I married you because I chose you, and I'd do it again, even if you never forgive me." The silence between them pulsed like a heartbeat, and for a moment, the rain fell without sound. Because now Isabel didn't know what to fear more, his lie or the part of her that still trusted him anyway. Isabel didn't speak to Ethan for 2 days. Not out of childish anger, but out of sheer emotional exhaustion. The truth unraveled everything. Their marriage, their quiet routine, the stolen glances she thought were tender now felt curated, designed. It wasn't the wealth that hurt. It was the fact that he had known who he was all along while she thought they were healing side by side as equals. Ethan gave her space. He didn't knock on her bedroom door. He didn't force a conversation. He remained in the estate, attending board meetings, answering calls, but his eyes always flicked toward the hallway when she passed. She wasn't sure if she hated him, because part of her didn't. Part of her remembered how he used to listen to her rants without judgment, how he never used her past against her, how he carried groceries, brewed tea, and shielded her from the very chaos he could have amplified with a single word. And maybe that's what terrified her most. He could have controlled her, but he didn't. Still, she needed time. Time to sort through the betrayal of omission. Time to ask herself if forgiveness meant weakness or growth. But time wasn't on her side. Marcus struck back. A formal letter arrived at the estate, issued by Marcus Lau's legal team. The accusations were predictable and venomous. Image defamation, malicious slander, reputational sabotage. He claimed that Isabel's so-called fake marriage to a servant had destroyed his business credibility, that she had orchestrated a media stunt to humiliate him, and that the emotional distress had caused Vivian to postpone their wedding. Of course, Isabel muttered, tossing the letter aside. He doesn't know how to lose quietly. Ethan picked it up, scanned it once, and nodded. He just gave us everything we need. The next morning, Ethan held a meeting in the estate's legal wing. Isabel expected 1 or 2 lawyers. Instead, she walked into a room with 10 of them, sharp, seasoned, and unbothered by Marcus's threats. This isn't just about shutting him down, Ethan told her afterward. It's about showing the truth, publicly. And then it began. Within 72 hours, Ethan's legal team filed a countersuit against Marcus Lau. Not for defamation, but for financial fraud, misrepresentation of assets, and manipulation of public media channels for personal gain. Using a combination of hacked texts, suspicious bank transfers, and evidence provided by a former accountant of Marcus's, Ethan's team painted a different picture. That Marcus had been funneling money through shell accounts during his tenure at a failed tech startup. That he'd bribed a tabloid agency to smear Isabel's name and elevate his own image. That Vivian had been paid under the table to leak curated information to the press. The news broke within hours. The narrative shifted overnight. Now, Marcus wasn't a betrayed ex-husband. He was a man under federal investigation. And Isabel, who once walked out of a hotel sobbing in the rain, was now trending under Isabel Deserves Better. But even as the public began to see the truth, Isabel stood in the middle of it all, strangely still. Because the war wasn't about Marcus anymore. It was about standing beside a man she wasn't sure she knew, and realizing that he had fought for her before she ever asked. That night, as she sat alone in the garden, Ethan approached quietly, holding a cup of tea in both hands. He didn't speak. He just set it down beside her and turned to leave. She stopped him with a single question. "Why didn't you use your power to make me love you?" He paused. The night wind brushed between them. "Because I wanted you to choose me," he said softly. "Not the version of me the world applauds." And with that, he walked away again, not with pride, but with patience. Because sometimes the truest kind of love was the kind that waited, even when it had every advantage not to. The courtroom was colder than Isabel expected. Pale light spilled through narrow windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. She sat at the plaintiff's table, her fingers calmly laced together, a folder of documents resting in front of her. She wore no dramatic colors, just a simple navy suit, hair pinned up, her expression composed but unreadable. Across the room, Marcus adjusted his tie too tightly, his usual bravado dulled by sleepless eyes and a poorly hidden twitch in his jaw. Vivian wasn't beside him. She hadn't been seen in public since the fraud allegations surfaced. Rumor had it, she left town with a silent goodbye and a single suitcase. Isabel didn't look at him when she entered the courtroom. She didn't need to anymore. Ethan sat in the very back row, hands clasped, no entourage, no security. Just him, silent support, unblinking. He didn't try to interfere. He didn't need to. This wasn't his war. This was hers. The trial moved slowly at first. Witnesses, financial experts, a mountain of documents proving that Marcus had falsified records and launched smear campaigns to publicly discredit her. His lawyer tried to paint her as vengeful, emotionally unstable, and manipulative. But when Isabel took the stand, something shifted. She spoke clearly, directly. Her voice didn't tremble. When I walked out of my marriage, she said, I left without asking for compensation, for property, or for pity. I left with nothing but my name. And that is the very thing Mr. Lau tried to destroy, because I refused to stay broken. Her statement wasn't theatrical. It was deliberate. When cross-examined, she stayed calm, even when Marcus's lawyer called her motivations calculated and performative. I didn't marry Ethan to hurt Marcus, she said. I married him because he gave me the one thing Marcus never did, peace. From the back of the courtroom, Ethan's gaze lowered, but not from shame, from quiet emotion. The judge listened, took notes, and after 3 days of arguments, delivered a verdict. Marcus Lau's case was dismissed with prejudice. Isabel was awarded damages and legal fees, and Marcus was instructed to issue a formal public apology for defamation. His frozen assets would remain under government review, pending separate fraud investigations. When the gavel struck, a quiet hum filled the courtroom. Cameras outside were already waiting, but inside, it was strangely still. Isabel didn't celebrate. She didn't cry. She simply turned, gathered her things, and walked down the aisle toward the exit. As she passed Ethan, she paused. Their eyes met. She didn't say a word, but she smiled, small, tired, real. He stood up and followed her out. Later that evening, news broke. Ex-husband of Isabel Tan faces bankruptcy after court loss. Vivian Han reportedly ends engagement with Marcus Lau. Isabel Tan, the quiet strength behind the storm. But Isabel didn't read the articles. She sat in her apartment, bare-faced, drinking tea on the balcony, watching the night fall. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about dignity, and the realization that sometimes healing didn't come with applause, but with silence, truth, and the knowledge that she never needed to shout to win. The estate was unusually quiet the morning Ethan handed her the envelope. He found her in the sunroom, curled up on the cream sofa with a book in her lap that she hadn't really been reading. She looked up at the soft sound of his footsteps, and for a second, their eyes met like they always had, like the silence between them had its own rhythm. But this time, he was holding something. He didn't sit. He just stood in front of her and gently placed the envelope on the coffee table. I had the papers drawn up, he said, his voice calm but strained. An annulment, no scandal, no noise, just clean closure. Isabel stared at the envelope for a moment, as if expecting it to disappear. I thought maybe you'd want the chance to start again with someone who didn't lie to you. Her throat tightened. He continued, I never meant to deceive you, but I did. And even if I did it to protect you, it was still a choice I made. You deserve someone who never hid behind anything. She didn't answer right away. She looked out the window, where early morning light spilled onto the garden. The same garden where Ethan had once brought her tea after a panic attack. The same garden where she had cried after losing her first client post-divorce. The same garden where he had quietly fixed the broken swing instead of saying, I told you so. I married you out of spite, she said quietly, and you said yes without asking why. He nodded once. Because you looked like you needed someone to say yes. A silence fell between them, soft but full. She looked at the envelope again, then gently pushed it aside. Her fingers didn't shake. I don't want this, she said. Ethan blinked. You don't have to decide now. I'm not pretending anymore, she interrupted. He stopped. She stood, slowly, closing the space between them. You think the lie that hurt me was your last name. It wasn't. The lie that hurt the most was the one I told myself, that no one would ever stand by me without expecting something in return. Her voice wavered, not from fear, but from truth. But you did, she said. Every time. Even when I was a mess. Even when I was cruel. You stood there like I was worth something. Ethan's jaw tightened, emotion flickering just behind his eyes. You are worth everything. I used to see a servant when I looked at you, she admitted. Then a CEO. Then a liar. But now I just see you. The man who never asked to be chosen, but chose me anyway. She reached for his hand. I don't want to start over with someone else, she whispered. I want to keep building with the one person who never left. For a moment, he said nothing. Then his fingers curled around hers, steady and warm. You're not forgiving me out of pity? He asked. She smiled softly. No, I'm loving you, out of clarity. Outside, the wind stirred the branches. In the distance, the sound of water in the fountain echoed gently through the courtyard. And in that quiet, without ceremony or promises or carefully written vows, Isabel and Ethan stood facing each other. Not as a deal, not as a secret, but as two people who had walked through every lie and ended up in something real. The air in Seoul was crisp and gentle, touched by the early blush of spring. Petals drifted softly through the air like slow, weightless snow, settling on the shoulders of guests dressed in muted pastels. But there were no reporters, no flashing lights, no staged photo shoots, just a garden behind an old hanok house where the wind carried the faint scent of plum wine and blossoms. Isabel stood under a flowering cherry tree, the same one Ethan had shown her weeks earlier when they came to Korea for a business meeting. They only bloom for a short time, he had said, but they bloom anyway. Now she stood there in a simple ivory dress, her hair pinned loosely, a quiet smile on her face. There was no grand aisle, only a cobbled path that curved through the grass, leading Ethan to her step by step. He wore a soft gray suit, no tie, no flash. When he reached her, he took both her hands, and for a long second, neither of them said anything. Because they didn't need to. This wasn't a wedding of apologies. It wasn't about starting over. It was about continuing, this time with intention. The officiant spoke quietly in both Korean and English, but Isabel barely registered the words. Her eyes stayed locked on Ethan's, his thumbs gently brushing her knuckles, his steady presence grounding her. When the time came to say vows, they didn't read from notes. I came into your life when mine was falling apart, Isabel said softly. But you never asked me to be fixed. You just stood beside me until I could stand on my own. And now I stand with you. Not as a woman trying to erase the past, but as someone ready to write the future. With you. Ethan's voice trembled for the first time she could remember. You saw me when I was hiding. You let me be no one, and you still treated me with respect. But now I want to be someone with you. Not because I need to be saved, but because I want to build something honest, something real, something that doesn't end when the petals fall. The guests clapped gently, some wiping their eyes. Mrs. Yoon, Ethan's housekeeper and oldest family confidant, wept openly. No suits, no power games, no masks, just family, a few close friends, and a promise whispered between two people who once built their connection on pretend, but had somehow landed on something true. They exchanged rings again, new ones, chosen together, no price tags, no brands. When Ethan kissed her, it wasn't rushed or posed. It was quiet, it was steady, it was real. Later that evening, they sat beneath the cherry tree alone, after everyone had gone. Isabel rested her head on Ethan's shoulder as pink petals fell into their laps. You know, she murmured, when I first told Marcus I was married to you, I just wanted to see his face crumble. Ethan chuckled. And now? She turned her head toward him, smiling. Now I just want to wake up beside you tomorrow, and every day after that. He kissed her temple, eyes closed. They didn't need an audience anymore. They didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Because this time, She hadn't said yes to prove a point. She said it because she knew exactly who she was saying it to. And for the first time, her heart felt light, not because it was finally full, but because it was finally safe. The hall was filled with warm light and quiet energy. Dozens of chairs lined the venue, soft music playing in the background as guests took their seats. At the front stood a clean white podium bearing the name of Isabel's new venture, Rise and Reclaim, a foundation dedicated to helping women rebuild their lives after emotional abuse and toxic relationships. It had been 8 months since her courtroom victory. 8 months since she stepped out of the shadows of old wounds and into a space of her own making. Now she was no longer known as Marcus Lau's ex-wife or the woman who married a servant. She was simply Isabel Tan, founder, advocate, survivor, and leader. She walked on stage in a fitted blue pantsuit, minimal jewelry, no need to impress. The applause was immediate but not thunderous, respectful, sincere. She smiled, briefly adjusting the microphone, her hands steady. Behind her, on a large screen, played a muted video montage of stories from women who had already found hope through her pilot programs. Safe housing, financial independence, counseling. "This isn't about shame," she began, her voice calm and clear. "It's about reclamation, about deciding that we are not defined by the people who failed to love us." The room stilled. Her words were not scripted for effect. They came from a place deeper than rehearsals could reach. "I once believed that walking away from pain made me weak, that surviving meant I lost. But the truth is, what we walk away from is often the very thing that clears the path to something real." Applause followed. She thanked the team, the sponsors, the women who had trusted her foundation with their stories. Then came the Q&A, and the question she knew would arrive. A journalist from a respected publication stood. "Miss Tan, looking back at everything, your marriage to Marcus, the public scrutiny, even the unexpected second marriage, do you regret any part of that journey?" Isabel paused, not to calculate her response, but to honor it. She smiled. "Sometimes," she said, "you need to lose everything to discover who was real." The audience nodded, some moved, others thoughtful. But Isabel didn't notice them. Her eyes had already shifted to the right side of the stage, where Ethan stood against the wall, arms crossed gently, wearing no suit, no watch, just a simple white shirt and quiet eyes. He wasn't watching the crowd, the foundation video, or the cameras. He was only watching her, the way he always did. Not with admiration, but with belief. Later that evening, after the event ended and the guests had gone, they walked through the empty hall together. Isabel carried her heels in one hand, her other tucked into Ethan's. The silence between them was no longer heavy. It was home. "You didn't say much today," she said. Looking up at him, he smiled. "You already said everything worth saying." They stopped beneath the banner with her foundation's name. She leaned against his shoulder. "You know what I realized?" she asked. "I never actually lost anything." He looked down at her, brow raised gently. "Because what I walked away from was never mine," she said. "And what I have now is everything I never knew I deserved." Ethan didn't reply. He just leaned down and kissed her forehead, the kind of kiss that never needed an audience. And in that quiet moment, Isabel finally understood what it meant to win. Not the applause, not the titles, not the revenge, but the peace that comes from knowing she had found her own voice, and that nothing and no one could take it away again.